My name is Allison Pratt. I am 28 years old. I never expected the first real crack in my marriage to appear in a compliance memo at work. If you have ever had someone you trusted rewrite the rules without telling you, this story might feel familiar. Stay with me as I walk through what happened. I worked as a senior forensic accountant at a mid-sized firm in the south end of Charlotte, North Carolina. The office sat on the 10th floor of a glass building with a clear view of the skyline. Most days follow the same pattern: review client files, flag anomalies, write reports. On that Tuesday morning, I opened my email and found a routine compliance notice from the internal team. One line stood out immediately. A series of wire transfers had triggered an automatic review. The originating account was one I recognized. The destination was a new entity called Miles Ventures, LLC. The advisory signature on the supporting documents belonged to my father, Arthur Pratt. I read the memo twice without moving from my chair. The amounts were not small. They totaled several $100,000, moved over the previous 4 months. The transfers had been routed through accounts that required dual authorization on paper, yet only one signature appeared in the digital trail. My husband Garrett's name was listed as the primary contact for the new LLC. My father's name appeared as the financial consultant who had facilitated the setup. I saved the file to a secure folder and closed the email. The rest of the morning passed in the usual rhythm of meetings and spreadsheet reviews. I answered questions from junior analysts and signed off on 2 other client reports. No one in the office would have guessed anything had shifted. I kept my voice even and my posture straight. Inside, I simply noted the facts and set them aside for later examination. At lunch, I stepped outside for a short walk along the sidewalk. The air was warm for early summer. I did not call Garrett. I did not call my father. Instead, I returned to my desk and pulled the full transaction history for the flagged accounts. The pattern was consistent. Small test transfers had begun 4 months earlier, followed by larger ones once the new LLC was active. None of the movements had been discussed with me, even though several of the source accounts carried both our names. By late afternoon, I had compiled a clean summary on a separate drive. I placed the drive in my bag and finished the day's remaining tasks. When the clock reached 5, I logged off, gathered my things, and drove the short distance to the apartment Garrett and I shared in the South End. The building was modern and quiet. I parked in the assigned spot and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Garrett was already home. He stood in the kitchen, scrolling on his phone. He looked up when I came in and offered the usual brief greeting. I set my bag on the counter and waited until he finished his message. Then I spoke in the same measured tone I used at the office. I saw a compliance memo today about several wire transfers, I said. They went to Miles Ventures, LLC. Your name is on the entity. My father's name is on the documents as the advisor. Can you tell me what that is? Garrett put his phone down. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. His expression did not change much. It's a small side project, he said. Your father thought it looked promising. We kept it quiet because these things move fast, and I didn't want to bother you with every detail while you were busy at work. I waited a moment before answering. The transfers total several $100,000. Some of the source accounts require both signatures. Only one appears in the records. Why wasn't I told before any of this started? He gave a short laugh that did not reach his eyes. You're making it sound like a conspiracy. It's an investment. Your father has good contacts in that space. He offered to help structure it so we could move quickly. I signed where I needed to sign. It's nothing that affects our day-to-day life. I kept my voice level. It affects the accounts that carry my name. It affects the professional files I review every week. If this had been legitimate and above board, there would have been no reason to route it through a new entity and keep the paperwork away from me. Garrett pushed off the counter and walked to the refrigerator. He opened it, took out a bottle of water, and twisted the cap off without offering me one. You always do this, he said. You turn every business conversation into an audit. I'm trying to build something on the side so we're not completely dependent on your salary forever. Your father saw the opportunity and stepped in to help. Most people would be grateful instead of treating it like a crime scene. I did not raise my voice. I did not step closer. I simply repeated the part that mattered. I need to see the full paperwork for the LLC and every transfer that touched joint accounts. I also need to know why my professional access at work was apparently used to expedite any of the filings. He took a drink and set the bottle down harder than necessary. You don't need to see anything. You need to trust that I'm handling our future. Your father and I have it under control. If you start digging around and asking questions at your firm, you're going to create problems that don't exist. Just leave it alone. The conversation ended there. Garrett picked up his phone again and walked into the living room. I stood in the kitchen for another minute, then carried my bag into the small office we used as a shared workspace. I closed the door quietly and sat at the desk. The summary I had made at the office was still on the secure drive. I opened it on the laptop and added the exact wording from Garrett's response. I noted the time and the precise language he had used. Then I saved the file and shut the computer. The next morning, I arrived at the office at the usual time. Julia Mercer, one of the senior analysts on my team, stopped by my desk with 2 coffees. She set one down and leaned against the partition. Julia had worked with me for almost 2 years. We handled overlapping client files and often reviewed each other's reports. You've been quieter than usual the last couple of days, she said. Everything all right at home, Garrett, okay? I took the coffee and thanked her. Everything is fine, I said, just working through a few account reviews. Julia studied me for a second longer than necessary. If something personal is pulling focus, you can say so. The team notices when someone starts staying late on files that don't require it. I'm not trying to pry, but if there's any risk to our current audits, it helps to know early. I met her eyes without looking away. There is no risk to the audits. I'm handling it. She nodded once and took her coffee back to her own desk. The exchange was short, but I registered the question in her voice. It was the first time a colleague had directly asked about my personal life in connection with work performance. I made a note of it in the same file where I kept the memo details. That afternoon, I received another internal alert. A second compliance flag had appeared on a related account. The new notice referenced an additional transfer that had cleared 2 days earlier. The amount was larger than the previous ones. The receiving account was the same Miles Ventures, LLC. The advisory note again listed my father. I copied the new alert into the secure folder and closed the system. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled to the contact I had saved under a neutral name. Russell Dean was an attorney I had consulted once before on a client contract matter. He handled personal and corporate matters with discretion. I sent a short text asking if he had any availability in the next 2 days for a confidential consultation. He replied within 10 minutes that he could meet late the following afternoon. I put the phone face down on the desk and returned to the client file in front of me. The rest of the day moved forward on schedule. I completed 2 reports and attended a brief team meeting. Julia did not approach me again. When 5 o'clock came, I logged off, collected my bag, and left the building. Left the show. On the drive home, I kept the radio off. I reviewed the sequence in my mind without emotion. The memo had arrived without warning. Garrett had dismissed the explanation request and redirected the conversation to trust and gratitude. My father had not been contacted yet. Julia had registered concern about my focus. Russell Dean had agreed to a meeting. Each piece fit into a larger picture that was still forming. I did not feel anger or panic. I simply continued driving toward the apartment, already planning the documents I would bring to the attorney. Garrett was not home when I arrived. A text appeared on my phone a few minutes later. It read, "Running late with a meeting. Don't wait up. We can talk tomorrow if you still want to." I placed the phone on the kitchen counter and walked into the office. I opened the laptop and added the text message to the file. Then I pulled the most recent bank statements for the joint accounts and printed the pages that showed the flagged transfers. I placed the printed sheets in a plain folder and set it inside my work bag. The secure drive stayed with me as well. Before I closed the laptop, I opened a new document and typed a single line at the top, "Actions taken without disclosure. Response when confronted, deflection and redirection to personal loyalty." I saved the document and shut the computer down. The apartment was quiet. I changed into comfortable clothes, prepared a simple meal, and ate it at the small table by the window. The city lights were visible in the distance. I did not call my father. I did not send another message to Garrett. I finished eating, cleaned the few dishes, and went to bed at the usual time. The following morning followed the same pattern as the one before. I arrived at the office, completed my assigned reviews, and kept conversations brief and professional. Julia passed my desk once and gave a small nod, but did not stop to talk. At 4 o'clock, I logged off early, told the front desk I had an outside appointment, and drove to Russell Dean's office a few blocks away. He greeted me in a small conference room with a notepad and a closed laptop. I placed the folder and the secure drive on the table between us. I spoke for 12 minutes without interruption, laying out the timeline from the first compliance memo through Garrett's response and the second alert. I did not add interpretation. I simply presented the documents and the exact words that had been used. Russell listened without taking notes until I finished. Then he asked 2 clarifying questions about the account authorizations and the structure of the new LLC. I answered both with the details I had verified. He opened his laptop and began typing. When he looked up again, his expression remained neutral. "I can review the full set of documents tonight," he said. "If the transfers used accounts that require your signature, and the signatures are missing or unauthorized, there are clear civil remedies. I also want to check whether any of the filings for the LLC referenced your professional credentials or access. That would move this into a different category." I nodded once. "I will have the remaining statements and the original memo by tomorrow morning." He closed the laptop. "Send them over when you have them. In the meantime, do not discuss the details with anyone at work or at home until we have a clearer picture. If your colleague asked about your focus, keep the answer the same as before. You are handling routine matters." I thanked him and left the building. On the drive back, I stopped at a small park near the office and sat in the car for a few minutes with the engine off. The day had not produced any dramatic confrontation or raised voices. It had produced a sequence of documented facts and one scheduled legal review. I started the car and continued toward the apartment. Garrett's car was in the parking spot when I arrived. I took the elevator up and unlocked the door. He was sitting on the couch with the television on, but the sound low. He looked over when I came in. "You left early today," he said. "Everything all right at the office?" I set my bag on the chair by the door and met his eyes. "I had an appointment. It was productive." He waited for more. When I did not continue, he turned the television off and stood up. "Look about the other night. I know you like to have all the information. I can have my father send over the paperwork for the LLC if it will make you feel better. It's really not as complicated as you're making it." I did not move from where I stood. "I already have the paperwork I need for now. I also have the compliance memos that flagged the transfers. I will let you know if I require anything else." Garrett's posture shifted slightly. He put his hands in his pockets. "You're talking like this is a deposition. It's our money. Your father helped because he has experience with these structures. You're turning a simple investment into some kind of investigation. I don't know what you expect me to say." I kept my voice exactly as it had been since the first memo arrived. "I expect the same transparency I give to every account I review at work. When that standard is not met, I document what I find and take the next required step. That is what I am doing." He stared at me for a moment longer, then shook his head once and walked toward the bedroom. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I remained in the living room, listening to the quiet of the apartment. The city hummed faintly outside the windows. I picked up my bag, carried it into the office, and closed that door as well. Inside the office, I opened the laptop and added one more line to the running document. Response to request for transparency, continued deflection, and characterization of inquiry as overreaction. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and sat in the chair without turning on any lights. The room was dark except for the glow from the building across the street. I stayed there until the sound of Garrett moving in the bedroom stopped. Then I stood changed into sleep clothes and went to bed in the guest room without another word. The next morning, I woke at the usual time, dressed and left for the office before Garrett was awake. I sent the additional statements and the original memo to Russell Dean on the secure channel we had used before. At 10 o'clock, Julia Mercer appeared at my desk again. She carried no coffee this time. "Russell Dean's name came up in a conversation downstairs," she said quietly. "Someone saw you leaving his building yesterday. If this is about a client matter, fine. If it's personal, I need to know whether it's going to affect your availability on the current audits." The partners are starting to ask questions about bandwidth. I looked up from the screen and answered in the same even tone I had used with everyone that week. It is a personal matter that I am handling outside of work hours. It will not affect my availability or the quality of my reports. If the partners have specific concerns, they can direct them to me. Julia held my gaze for a second. Okay, just make sure whatever it is stays contained. We have 3 active files that require full attention through the end of the month. She returned to her desk. I turned back to my screen and continued the report I had been writing. The morning moved forward without further interruption. At noon, I stepped out for a short walk and called Russell Dean from the sidewalk. He answered on the second ring. I have reviewed the documents you sent, he said. There are several irregularities in the authorization chain for the transfers. The LLC filings also reference an address that matches one of your firm's client portals in a way that suggests cross-use of credentials. I recommend we schedule a formal consultation tomorrow afternoon to discuss protective filings and next steps. Bring any additional records you have. I told him I would be there and ended the call. I walked back to the office building and rode the elevator to the 10th floor. The rest of the day passed in the same controlled rhythm. I completed the report, attended one scheduled meeting, and logged off at 5. On the drive home, I stopped at a small store and purchased a second secure external drive. I transferred the growing file of memo statements and conversation notes onto both drives and placed one in my bag and one in a locked drawer at the apartment. Garrett was home when I arrived. He was on the phone in the living room. I heard him say, "She's still asking questions," before he noticed me and ended the call. He set the phone down and looked at me across the room. "My father wants to come by this weekend to sit down and clear this up," he said. "He thinks you're misunderstanding the structure. It would be better if we handled it together instead of you running off to lawyers." I placed my bag on the chair and met his eyes without blinking. "I have already scheduled a meeting with my attorney for tomorrow. If your father has documents or explanations he would like reviewed, he can send them through counsel. I will not be discussing the details in person until the legal picture is complete." Garrett's jaw tightened. He picked up his phone again and walked toward the bedroom. Before he closed the door, he turned back once. "You're making this into something it doesn't have to be. Your father and I were trying to do something good. You're the one turning it into a problem." The door closed. I stood in the living room for a full minute, listening to the silence that followed. Then I carried my bag into the office, closed the door, and opened the laptop. I added the latest exchange to the document. The timestamp read 6:12 p.m. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and sat in the dark room with the city lights visible through the window. Outside traffic moved steadily along the streets below. Inside the apartment, Garrett remained in the bedroom. I did not knock on the door. I did not send a message to my father. I simply sat with the facts that had accumulated over the past 4 days and waited for the next required step. The next morning arrived without any further messages from my husband. I followed my usual routine, dressed for the office, and left the apartment before he woke. On the drive to Russell Dean's office, I reviewed the timeline once more in my mind, confirming each date and amount against the documents in my bag. The city moved at its normal pace around me. I parked in the visitor space and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Russell Dean was already in the conference room when I arrived. He had printed copies of the memos and statements spread across the table in neat rows. I placed my secure drive beside them and sat down. He began without preamble. "The authorization gaps are clear on the joint accounts," he said. "Several transfers required dual signatures according to the account agreements, yet only one digital approval appears. The LLC filings list an address that overlaps with one of your firm's client portals. That overlap creates a potential professional exposure if any of your credentials or internal systems were referenced during setup." I listened without interruption. When he finished, I asked 2 specific questions about the timeline for protective filings and the process for separating the joint accounts. He answered both with the same measured tone I used at work. We agreed on the documents I would gather next and the date for a follow-up meeting. I left his office 40 minutes later with a printed list of next actions in my bag. I returned to the South End office building and rode the elevator to the 10th floor. The morning passed in the usual sequence of file reviews and team updates. At 11 o'clock, Julia Mercer appeared at my desk again. She did not bring coffee this time. She kept her voice low. The partners asked me directly this morning whether any of our active audits might be affected by outside financial reviews, she said. Your name came up because of the meeting you had yesterday. If this involves personal accounts that could touch compliance work, they want to know before it becomes a larger issue. I told them I would ask you directly. I met her eyes without looking away. The matter is personal and is being handled through proper channels. It does not involve any active client files or internal systems. I will confirm that in writing to the partners if they require it. Julia studied me for another second. They will require it if the questions continue. Just make sure whatever you are doing stays contained. We have 3 files due for final sign-off by the end of the week. She returned to her desk. I turned back to the report on my screen and completed the remaining sections without further delay. The afternoon moved forward on schedule. I logged off at 5 and drove home. Garrett was already in the apartment when I arrived. He stood near the kitchen counter with his phone in his hand. The screen showed an active call. He looked up as I set my bag down. My father is on the line, he said. He wants to speak with both of us about the situation. I did not move closer. I will speak with him through counsel. Any explanations or documents can be sent to Russell Dean. Garrett held the phone out toward me anyway. His father's voice came through the speaker clearly. Allison, this is your father. Garrett told me you have been asking questions at work and meeting with an attorney. That is not necessary. I helped structure the investment because Garrett needed quick access to capital for a promising opportunity. The transfers were legitimate business moves. Involving outside lawyers only complicates something that was meant to benefit the family. I kept my voice even. The accounts involved require dual authorization. The signatures are missing. The new entity was created without disclosure. I have documented the sequence and will follow the legal steps required to protect the accounts. There was a short pause on the other end. When my father spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. You are treating this like one of your audit cases instead of a family matter. Garrett and I were trying to build something without burdening you. Your reaction is turning a simple arrangement into a problem that does not need to exist. I suggest you reconsider before this goes any further. Garrett ended the call and set the phone on the counter. He crossed his arms. You heard him. This was never about hiding anything from you. It was about moving fast on an opportunity. Now you have made it into something formal and expensive. We could have handled it between us. I picked up my bag and carried it into the office. I closed the door and opened the laptop. I added the exact wording from both my husband and my father to the running document, including the time of the call. Then I saved the file and closed the computer. When I returned to the living room, Garrett was still standing in the same place. I am filing for legal separation of our finances tomorrow, I said. The paperwork will be served through counsel. Any further communication about the accounts can go through Russell Dean. Garrett's posture changed. He took a step forward. You are not serious. You are going to blow up our entire situation over a few transfers that were already in motion. Your father stepped in to help because you were too focused on your job to notice opportunities. Now you want to punish both of us for trying to secure our future. That is not how this works. I did not raise my voice or step back. The accounts are documented. The missing authorizations are documented. The response when I asked for transparency is also documented. I will follow the process that protects the legal position of those accounts. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he picked up his phone and walked toward the bedroom. The door closed harder than before. I remained in the living room until the sound of movement stopped. Then I returned to the office, opened the laptop again, and transferred the updated file to both secure drives. I placed one drive in my bag and locked the second in the drawer. The next morning, I arrived at the office at the usual time and completed the final sections of the reports due that week. At 10 o'clock, an email arrived from the compliance team. It referenced a new flag on one of the previously reviewed accounts. The transfer amount was larger than the earlier ones. The destination was again Miles Ventures, LLC. The advisory note listed my father's name. I saved the email to the secure folder and closed the system. I sent a copy to Russell Dean with a short note confirming the new alert. Then I finished the remaining work on my desk. At noon, I stepped outside for a short walk and called Russell from the sidewalk. He answered immediately. The new transfer strengthens the pattern, he said. I have prepared the initial filings for separation of the joint accounts and a request for full documentation from the LLC. I can have them ready for your signature by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, continue documenting every communication. If your father or your husband attempts further direct contact, refer them to me. I thanked him and ended the call. When I returned to the 10th floor, Julia Mercer was waiting near my desk. She spoke before I sat down. The partners scheduled a short meeting for first thing tomorrow morning, she said. They want a direct update on whether any personal financial reviews could intersect with our current client work. I told them I would confirm with you today. If there is any overlap at all, even indirect, they need to know before the meeting. I placed my bag on the desk and met her eyes. There is no overlap with client work. The matter is limited to personal accounts. I will provide that confirmation in writing before the end of the day. Julia nodded once and returned to her own desk. I opened my laptop and drafted a short email to the partners, stating that the personal matter under review did not involve any active client files, internal systems, or professional credentials. I sent the email, completed the last report on my list, and logged off at 5. On the drive home, I stopped at a small store and purchased a second lockbox for the secure drives. I placed both drives inside and put the box in the trunk of the car. When I reached the apartment, Garrett was not there. A single text message waited on my phone. My father is coming by tomorrow evening. We are going to resolve this in person. Be here. I did not reply. I carried the lockbox inside, placed it in the office drawer, and locked the drawer. Then I prepared a simple meal and ate it at the table by the window. The city lights were visible beyond the glass. I finished eating, cleaned the dishes, and returned to the office. I opened the laptop one more time and added the text message to the document with the exact timestamp. I saved the file, closed the computer, and sat in the chair without turning on the lights. The apartment remained quiet. No further messages arrived. I stayed in the office until the building across the street went dark. Then I stood, changed into sleep clothes, and went to the guest room. I set the alarm for the usual time and lay down without checking the bedroom door. The following morning, I woke dressed and left the apartment before any movement came from the other room. I drove to the office and arrived early. I sent the written confirmation to the partners as promised. At 9 o'clock, the short meeting took place in the conference room. I stated the same facts I had put in the email. The partners asked 2 clarifying questions about potential professional exposure. I answered both with the details already verified. The meeting ended after 12 minutes. I returned to my desk and continued the day's work. At 4 o'clock, an email arrived from Russell Dean. It contained the draft filings for separation of the joint accounts and a request for the LLC to provide complete records. He noted that the documents could be signed the next afternoon. I printed the drafts, placed them in my bag, and finished the remaining tasks on my list. When 5 o'clock came, I logged off and drove toward the apartment. Garrett's car was already in the assigned spot. I parked, took the elevator up, and unlocked the door. He stood in the living room with my father. Both turned when I entered. My father spoke first. "We are here to put an end to this," he said. "Garrett and I have the paperwork for the investment. You can review it now and see that everything was handled correctly. There is no need for lawyers or formal filings. This can stay within the family." I set my bag on the chair by the door and looked at both of them without moving closer. The documents I require have already been requested through counsel. Any additional paperwork can be sent to Russell Dean. I will not be reviewing or signing anything in person tonight. Garrett took a step forward. His voice was lower than before. "You are forcing this into a confrontation that does not need to happen. Your father came here to help resolve it. You are choosing to treat us like opposing parties instead of family. That choice has consequences." I did not alter my tone. The choice was made when the transfers occurred without disclosure and when the request for transparency was met with deflection. The next steps are already in motion. I will sign the separation filings tomorrow. My father's expression tightened. He glanced at Garrett, then back at me. "You are making a mistake that will affect more than just the accounts. Think carefully before you sign anything that cannot be undone." I picked up my bag again. "The filings are already prepared. I will sign them in the presence of counsel. If either of you has additional information that changes the documented facts, send it through the proper channel. I walked past them into the office and closed the door. I heard low voices in the living room, but did not open the door again. I opened the laptop, added the evening exchange to the document with precise wording and time, and saved the file. Then I transferred the updated document to both secure drives and placed one in my bag. I sat at the desk until the voices in the living room stopped and the front door opened and closed. When the apartment was quiet again, I stood and walked to the window. The city lights stretched across the south end. I remained there for several minutes without turning on any lights in the room. The next required step was already scheduled. I returned to the desk, closed the laptop, and prepared for the following day. The following morning, I arrived at Russell Dean's office at the scheduled time with the printed drafts and both secure drives in my bag. He had already prepared the final versions of the separation filings for the joint accounts and the formal request for complete records from Miles Ventures, LLC. I reviewed each page, confirmed the language, matched what we had discussed, and signed where required. Russell countersigned as witness and placed the originals in a sealed envelope for service. While I was there, an email arrived from the compliance team at my firm. It contained one additional flag on an older account that had not appeared in earlier reviews. The transfer had occurred 6 weeks prior and followed the same pattern as the others. I forwarded the email to Russell without comment. He added it to the file and noted that the cumulative pattern strengthened the case for immediate protective orders. I left his office at 10:30 and drove directly to the South End building. I parked in my assigned spot, took the elevator to the 10th floor, and logged on at my desk. The morning moved through its usual sequence of file reviews and team updates. At 11:15, Julia Mercer stopped by my desk on her way to a meeting. She spoke quietly. "The partners received your confirmation email," she said. "They asked me to let you know that as long as the personal matter stays outside client files and internal systems, they consider it resolved on their end. I told them you had been clear from the beginning." I met her eyes. "Thank you for relaying that. The matter is now being handled through the proper legal channels and will not intersect with work again." Julia nodded once. "Good. We have enough on our plates without additional variables." She continued down the hall. I returned to the report on my screen and completed it without further interruption. At 1 o'clock, I stepped outside and called Russell from the sidewalk. He confirmed that the signed filings had already been sent for service. Service on my husband would occur that afternoon. Service on the LLC would follow the next business day. He advised me to document any further direct contact and refer all questions to him. I ended the call and returned to my desk. The afternoon passed without incident. I finished the remaining tasks on my list and logged off at 5. On the drive home, I stopped at the small park near the office and sat in the car with the engine off for several minutes. The signed documents were now in motion. The next required steps belonged to counsel and the court system. I started the car and continued to the apartment. Garrett was waiting in the living room when I arrived. A copy of the served documents lay on the coffee table. He looked up as I set my bag down. "You actually did it," he said. His voice was flat. "You served papers on our accounts and on the LLC. My father is on his way over right now. We are going to talk about this like adults instead of letting lawyers turn it into a war." I remained near the door. Any discussion about the accounts or the LLC goes through Russell Dean. I have already signed the filings. Further communication will be handled in writing. The front door opened before Garrett could answer. My father stepped inside. He closed the door behind him and looked at me across the room. "Allison, this has gone far enough," he said. Garrett showed me the papers. "You are separating finances and demanding records from an investment that was never meant to be public. I helped structure it because Garrett needed capital quickly and did not want to burden you while you were focused on your career. The transfers were clean. The only problem is the one you created by involving an outsider." I did not move from where I stood. "The accounts required dual authorization. The signatures are missing from the records. The new entity was created and funded without disclosure. Those facts are documented." The response when I asked for transparency was deflection and redirection to family loyalty. I followed the process that protects the legal position of the accounts. My father took one step closer. You are choosing to treat your husband and your father as adversaries instead of family. That choice has consequences beyond the accounts. Think about what you are doing to the relationships that have supported you. Garrett spoke from the couch. Your father stepped in when you were too busy to notice opportunities. Now you are punishing both of us for trying to secure a future. You can still stop this. Tell your lawyer to withdraw the filings. We can handle the rest between us. I kept my voice exactly as it had been since the first compliance memo arrived. The filings are signed and served. The request for records has been submitted. Any additional information can be sent through counsel. I will not be withdrawing the documents or discussing the details in person. My father's expression tightened. He glanced at Garrett, then back at me. You have made your position clear. I hope you understand that some decisions cannot be undone without cost. He turned and left the apartment. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Garrett remained on the couch. He picked up the served documents and stared at them for several seconds before setting them back on the table. You really think this is going to end well for you? He said. You think freezing the accounts and demanding records is going to make everything go back to normal? It won't. You have turned a simple investment into a legal mess that will cost all of us time and money. Your father was right. You chose this. I picked up my bag. The accounts are now protected under the filings. The records request is in process. I will continue to document any further communication. That is the process I will follow. I walked into the office and closed the door. I opened the laptop and added the evening exchange to the running document with precise wording and timestamps. I saved the file and transferred it to both secure drives. Then, I placed one drive in the lockbox in the trunk of my car and returned the other to the drawer in the office. When I came back to the living room, Garrett was still sitting on the couch. He did not look up. I went to the guest room, changed into sleep clothes, and lay down. The apartment remained quiet for the rest of the night. The next morning, I woke at the usual time and left for the office before Garrett was awake. I arrived early, completed the reports due that week, and attended the scheduled team meeting. Julia Mercer sat across from me and gave a small nod when the meeting ended. No further questions were asked about personal matters. At noon, Russell Dean called. He confirmed that the LLC had acknowledged receipt of the records request and had 30 days to respond. The joint accounts had been separated under the protective order. No further transfers could occur without court approval. He asked if I had received any additional direct contact. I told him I had not. I ended the call and returned to my desk. The afternoon passed in the normal rhythm of file reviews and emails. At 5, I logged off, collected my bag, and drove to the apartment. Garrett's car was not in the assigned spot. The living room was empty when I entered. A single note lay on the kitchen counter in his handwriting. I will be staying elsewhere until this is resolved. Do not contact me directly. I read the note once, placed it in the file with the other documented communications, and carried my bag into the office. I opened the laptop and added the note with the timestamp. Then I saved the file and closed the computer. Over the following days, the process continued through counsel. The LLC provided partial records that confirmed the pattern of transfers and the advisory role my father had played in the setup. The protective orders remained in place. Garrett did not return to the apartment. My father sent one additional message through Garrett's phone, asking for a family meeting. I referred the message to Russell Dean and received no further direct contact. 3 weeks later, I met with Russell Dean to review the final status. The joint accounts had been fully separated. The request for complete LLC records had been fulfilled. No additional transfers had occurred. Russell confirmed that the documented facts supported the protective measures and that any future disputes would be handled through the court system. I left his office and drove back to the South End. I parked in my assigned spot and took the elevator to the apartment. The living room was quiet. I set my bag on the chair by the door and walked to the window. The city lights stretched across the skyline. I stood there for several minutes without turning on any lights in the room. The facts had been documented from the first compliance memo through the final records request. The responses from my husband and my father had been consistent in their deflection and redirection to family loyalty. The legal process had protected the accounts and required transparency from the entity they had created. I had followed each required step without raising my voice or altering my tone. I turned from the window and returned to the office. I opened the laptop one last time and added a single closing line to the document protective orders in place. Records obtained. No further direct contact. Process complete. I saved the file, transferred it to the secure drive in my bag, and closed the computer. The apartment remained quiet. I changed into comfortable clothes and prepared a simple meal. I ate at the table by the window and watched the city move below. When I finished, I cleaned the dishes and returned to the office. I sat at the desk without turning on the lights and looked out at the skyline. The actions taken without disclosure and the responses when transparency was requested had determined the outcome. The protective measures were now in effect. The accounts were separated. The records were on file. I had followed the process that protected my legal position. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever discovered that actions spoke louder than any claim of loyalty, you understand the choice I made. Would you have walked away too?